The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I am one of your co-hosts, Melissa Miller. I'm a science writer and write for Star Wars Insider magazine.
And I'm James Floyd. I'm your other co-host. I'm also a freelancer for Star Wars Insider magazine. This episode, Star Warsologies, is going to chat about marine biology in Star Wars, evidence in such cool aquatic creatures from Naboo and Mon Cala to even the desert world of Kobo. Our guest expert today is Gabriel Santos, the Director of Visitor Engagement and Education at the Raymond M. Alf Museum of Paleontology in Claremont, California. He's been one of our San Diego Comic-Con panelists before for the Science of Jurassic World, which you can listen to as episode 22. Hey, Gabriel.
How's it going?
We're so glad to have you here.
Yes.
I am very excited to be here.
Yes, and Gabriel hosted us, I don't know, was that like a year or so ago at the Alf Museum of Paleontology, which is such a cool spot that James and I had a fun little field trip up there.
I had a great time with you all. Every time some of my friends can come visit me at the museum is a great day.
Just because I know we're probably not going to have time to get to Purrgil because they're not really marine creatures. The most recent issue of Star Wars Insider magazine, coming out on June 25th, 2024. Look for me and Gabriel to make an appearance in there talking about the wonderful Purrgil.
Gabriel, can you define marine biology and how that connects to your field of paleontology?
Yeah, well, marine biology is the study of life in the oceans, right? The way that things interact with each other, the way that they've evolved and adapted to the many different types of environments in the ocean. Even though, we think of the ocean as one big single environment, there's actually many, many different ecological niches that different types of animals have filled. And marine biology is studying all of those in the way that they all connect to each other. So for me, as a marine mammal paleontologist, I look at the past marine biology in a sense, right? I look at the fossils and we learn as much as we can about the ancient seas from those evidence, whether it's learning about marine mammals called desmostylians that lived in California 15 million years ago to learning about some of the very, very first organisms in the ancient sea. So it's kind of like a continuum, right? Learning about life from the very, very first versions of life in our ancient seas, which is where we think all life originated on our planet, all the way to how life is adapting, changing, and living today.
Did Star Wars influence at all your going into this field?
Not necessarily directly into marine paleo or like kind of the sciences in general. I did love Star Wars growing up, like a lot. And I actually wrote about watching Star Wars Episode 5 for the first time for my college admittance essay for UC Irvine and how it inspired my love of science because it's science fiction, science fantasy, and that movie, all the movies and everything from the comics to all elements of Star Wars, it kind of taught me to question the world, ask questions of like why, how things work, what is possible, right? And so that's what inspired me to kind of have a scientific mindset. And that eventually led me to becoming a paleontologist. So it's not a direct route, but it for sure influenced me. The Force guided me to become a scientist.
Oh, that makes me so happy. I love to hear that because I had a very similar experience with Star Wars where it definitely got me wondering about what's off screen and, what wasn't shown and all those little other stories. So I love that.
This is why we all friends.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, we kind of shoehorned you into the marine science just because we have covered paleontology with Stuart Samita and also with Jim Lehane, and there's just so much to talk about. And then once we started making a list of marine critters, it was like, of course, this is so easy an episode. We're gonna have a hard time logging off here, I think.
Well, every time I watch all the Star Wars stuff, every time they go into the marine realm, which I think is kind of rare-ish, I'm sitting there and I'm always like, oh, what's that? Where did that come from? Who inspired that? And I'm always just like, I want to get in a ship and dive down into the trench of Naboo or, on the world of Dak, Mon Cala, whatever we call it now.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking that happened recently with the show Obi-Wan Kenobi, where, what is it, that like big pyramid building with the bad people in it? Now I can't remember what they're called.
The Inquisitor stronghold.
Fortress Inquisitorius.
Right. Yeah. But when they like open the, windows or whatever, and there's like, stuff going by, I was like, oh, forget all this drama. Like, let's go out there.
It's a great undersea marine station.
Yeah, it's wasted on them.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, one of the first times we really do see aquatic life in Star Wars is episode one. We get to Naboo, and it's not an ocean, is it? It's kind of a very weird environment. Is it freshwater, saltwater? What do you think?
So yeah, I remember watching that as a little 10-year-old kid and already being in love with marine biology. I was doing like marine biology camps and stuff, and I was like so in awe of seeing this trench. Because at the time, I really wasn't questioning whether it's plausible or not. I was just like so excited to see like all these cool marine critters and things like. So yeah, I'm not sure if the trench is saltwater or freshwater, right? Like it's kind of confusing if we just look at how it's depicted in the movie, because they go from Otagunga, which is apparently in a deep lake, and then they go straight to the trench from there. Now, knowing how oceans really work, that doesn't quite make sense. There's no such thing as a hollow planet where like you can go from one side directly to the other through the planet core, as they say, right? Because on most planets, the core is either metal core or there's all the magma that's under there because, you know, there's a ton of intense pressure and heat. So now as an adult who has a degree in geology and things like that, I think about the planet core, as they say, as just kind of what they think it is. But I think that this is more of like subterranean labyrinths of maybe like old lava tubes that are no longer active and it's filled with water. Could be like fresh or salt water. I'm not sure. These labyrinths that are not totally deep into the
Mhm.
planet crust, but just kind of navigate through just below the surface a little bit so that they can get to wherever they need to go. Because I don't actually think also that Otagunga is on the complete opposite side of Naboo.
Right. Because when it's time for battle, they aren't that far away.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what's your favorite creature in Naboo's deeps?
Oh, that's easy. It's the Sando Aqua Monster.
The really big one.
There's always a bigger fish. Yes.
Always a bigger one. Yeah.
The Sando Aqua Monster for me was really cool because it has like these characteristics that look almost marine mammally. Like it looks like a cat that they gave fins to and they put in the trench. I mean, like one, it's gigantic, so it has like those whale-like qualities to it, and its face just looks really whale-like to me. But then again, it has limbs, it can hold things because it's got hands almost. When it grabbed the OPC killer and then the Colo clawfish, right? It was able to grab them and bite it. And so it's just this really cool creature. And for somebody who has loved and adored whales since I was a very young kid, just that similarity really grabbed me as a kid, and I just fell in love with it. When Terrell Whitlatch's book, the Nature in Star Wars book, I was so excited because they had the entire Naboo section, and I spent I don't know how many hours just like reading over and over about the trench and the Sando Aqua Monster and trying to figure out like where did this thing come from? Does it have land origins? Did it evolve completely in the trench? It's just so cool and like I had so many questions about it. I love it.
I would think that the way it has claws and kind of limbs and legs, as opposed to flippers and fins, that it did start off as a land creature and then it went back to the water and it just got huge. How would it live at those depths and get so big?
Evolution in Star Wars does not follow the same evolutionary paths that we understand on Earth, right? For me, I try not to like make too many assumptions about where something originated and what its evolutionary pathway is in Star Wars because, you know, the living force is guiding all of that and it has its own ideas of what things should be. But if we're looking at it from Earth perspective, I totally agree, James. Like it must have come from something that had evolved back into the water, right? But the other thing that's confusing is, well, it looks like it has gills. So either it was semi-amphibious before, maybe it re-evolved gills or something. I'm not sure. Again, that's all the questions that I have about that cool Sando Aqua monster. Now,
Yeah.
how does it live and how does it get so big? That's what's cool about it is here on our planet, we have giant whales, right? And then the blue whale is the largest organism to ever exist on our planet. And the reason is because they live in a completely weightless environment where gravity and their size aren't really affecting them. So because they don't have to deal with gravity like all of us land animals do, gravity is really affecting my knees lately. It can get huge. Just like the OPC killer and the Colo clawfish, on our planet too, whales and other creatures are able to dive incredibly deep. Like the sperm whale is one of the deepest diving animals out there. And so it's possible that it could have adapted to those intense pressures going through the planet core and evolve to live in such an environment, and not only live, but apparently thrive.
Yeah, no, I think the Sando Aqua Monster is my favorite of that sequence too. And partly, as you mentioned, because of Terrell Whitlatch's wildlife book, because she shows that it like comes up sometimes and hunts land animals. It'll just like grab some of those other Naboo forest critters. And I like the idea of just being in like a small lake. And then all of a sudden, this huge, massive thing comes
I'm
up.
just thinking like those swamp critters, it would eat it in a bite. It could grab it and then shove it in like popcorn.
The thing I liked about that picture that you're talking about that Terrell Whitlatch drew, where it was coming out, it doesn't look as cat-like there, but it almost looks like giant otter also in the way that it kind of rears up and like comes up. And its hands almost look otterish in a way too. If you've ever seen like an otter eat fish, especially like a giant river otter, it's very similar to the way like the Sando was eating the Kolo clawfish.
Yeah, and as cute as sea otters are, I hear very, not if you're their prey.
Yeah, otters are predators. They're very
Yeah.
cute looking, but they're within the group Carnivora. They are actually quite mean if you get in their way or if you're the thing that they're hunting.
Talking about other sea creatures, the thala-sirens on Acto that we see Luke milk, they're some kind of pinniped.
Oh, that milking scene. Like
Yeah.
it's my very least favorite part of one of my favorite Star Wars movies.
I mean, okay, yes, they did a great job of creating something that looks very alien, right? That has these marine mammally origins, especially with the mammary glands, as we saw. But they're not my favorite in the world of Star Wars. They look sort of sea lion-esque at the way that they have those flippers and the way that their bodies are, but also like the way they kind of had them, like, I'll say lounging on the shore. They didn't seem the most adapted or thought out creatures, because for a lot of marine creatures and marine mammals in particular, when they do that transition from land to water, they get more streamlined. They have to do that in order for them to swim efficiently. The thala-sirens, I'm just gonna say it, they got hips, right? They're thick a little
They're
bit.
thick.
Yeah, not exactly the most streamlined shape, I would say. We have yet to see them swim, so I'm not going to make any like assumptions on how their locomotion works in the water. But just looking at them, I was like, that's a weird looking marine creature. And also, they
Yeah.
really didn't need to give the mammary gland portion, but whatever.
Yeah, they're definitely more like, I don't know, manatee-esque in terms of potato shape or whatever. But then they have that neck.
The little schnoz, yeah. What
So
do you
maybe
think
they're
they eat with a nose like that?
That was interesting to me too, because for like sea lions and things like that, they can smell and they're very active predators. But on land, when you see those kind of proboscis things that's specifically for scent, you've got like the elephant seal for sure, but their noses are more of a present organ or
Right, yeah. I was about to say, like, hey, look at me, girl. kind
yeah,
of thing,
right?
right?
So I'm not sure what they were doing with that. Maybe this specific species adapted to where they can really smell very well underwater, and they used maybe their nose, sort of like a star-nosed mole, if you've ever seen them. Like they're able to blow out a really small bubble of air when they're underwater, and then they can pick up scent particles, and then they inhale that bubble back in, and they're able to smell underwater. So it's
That
possible
is
that's
so
what they're
cool.
doing.
Well, I was about to say, everyone who watched Obi-Wan Kenobi also saw Star-Nosed Mole because there was the Zach Braff voiced character or whatever that had that sort of nose that was straight off a Star-Nosed Mole. No,
World of Star Wars being inspired by our amazing world.
exactly. I mean, I like Ecto, right, because I love the porgs and, The Last Jedi in general and stuff. But that was one of the few times I feel like we've seen, almost like a food web. And then Luke's sort of like subsistence hunting and the fish nuns that are there, which I can't believe is the real name of those creatures. We don't see the whole ecology of many planets.
I thought Octo was cool in some sense because one, I think it was really cool in how they had to design the porgs as like a way to just correct something in the background, right? When you just got a bunch of puffins. But I thought it was cool that they worked to some degree to create like this world that makes sense between the porgs, the thala-siren, and the fish, and the seemingly aquatically evolved native species. I thought that was a really cool thing.
The caretakers, the lanai, which is their official kind of species name, they are more related to the porgs as kind of avian-esque evolutionary wise. But yes, they look kind of more like walking fish people.
That
Yeah.
I did not know.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I have to decide whether or not to edit out your hatred of porgs so that I
That's
can still
okay.
be friends with you.
I don't hate porgs. I think they're very cute, and I own a couple porgs. I actually have a porg right here next to me.
Yay.
For a lot of the other Star Wars creatures that I've seen, I feel like there was a lot more thought put into the reason why they have certain features and characteristics, right? Like they thought a little bit about their evolutionary process and why they're in the world and why they work. Look again, the Sando Aqua monster. They could have just put a giant whale-like thingy, but instead they made sure that they gave it gills, right? To make sense for something that lived in the trench. Its
Right.
hands are webbed as a sense of swimming, and its tail, if you look at it, is more whale-like in its fluke. It's not side to side motion like a shark, but it's the up and down like a whale because they drew from that aspect. The creatures fit seamlessly into the world. With the porgs, again, they were like made to edit out the puffins, and they look very puffiny. But looking at like their body shape, their bird mammal combinations, which we've seen many times in the world of Star Wars, but there's just something about them that doesn't click, I guess. I think this is
Right.
me being a little jaded as a scientist. Like, I have trouble immediately understanding what they're adapted for.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it is the difference of like Terrell, who was the concept artist for episode 1, has a background in zoology, right? And Jake, the concept artist for the Disney Star Wars, watches a lot of David Attenborough specials and stuff like that, but doesn't, necessarily isn't going to be thinking in that same mindset or whatever. But my first article with Star Wars Insider was talking to puffin biologists about porgs, and they totally were like, it's fine that it doesn't have a bill. Sea lions don't have bills, they catch fish. All it means is that they can't dig themselves a burrow, which just means that they don't have to worry about predation, or that they're nasty enough that they just fight back predators. They don't need to nest underground. So there's always a way, and I will hear nothing bad about porgs, but that's okay.
I totally hear you and agree with what you said. Like that would make sense for sure.
Well, what are some other ocean planets or creatures we should definitely talk about? I really like I don't know how to pronounce it, but on Kamino.
I'd pronounce it Iowa.
Iowa.
Like,
Okay.
it is short for air whale. Originally, they were a concept that Ralph McQuarrie came up with for Empire Strikes Back. Eventually, kind of cycled through. Terrell Whitlatch made some concepts for it for episode 1, but they didn't get used there. And eventually, they made their way into episode 2 on Kamino.
I mean, maybe just because that's what I would want as a steed, right? Something that could manta ray-esque underwater, but then could just, I don't know, hit the air and keep flying. But those ones are so cool. Reminds me, and then the only thing I can think of is like flying fish.
When I first saw the Iowa, I was in love with that thing because one, it looks very whalish. Its face looks very baleen whale almost, the way it curves. But then its body looked very manta ray-y to me, right? And so rays are pretty cool because they can't glide like flying fish, but they're known to jump out of the water and they can jump pretty high. That was a really cool connection for me, was seeing this creature that was whale-like and manta ray-like. Again, it's like sometimes just that little bit of tweaking that makes it feel alien and also familiar, right? So it gave me that sense of science fiction, but still felt familiar and cool to me. And so I love that creature. I'm so sad we didn't see more of the ocean world of Kamino, since the Kaminoans are aquatic in their origin. I want to know what else lived in that ocean planet. I mean, we only ever saw the surface of that world, and mostly through the clone's eyes, which is cool, don't get me wrong. But that's one of the planets that I wish we gotten to see more, because who knows what other kind of cool creatures are living under there.
Yeah, definitely. It's like we have Kaminoans, we have Iowas, and we know zilch else.
Yeah, because they show up in like an episode or two, I think, of the Clone Wars as well as Attack of the Clones. But yeah, we don't ever really get, more about what else is there or how big they can get. I want to know if they're like easy to wrangle, like do you have to make friends with them? Do you have to be, how are they domesticated?
That's a good question. I was just curious, as like you mentioned earlier, that ocean creatures can get a lot bigger because they don't have to deal with the gravity. But if you're flying, you've got a serious gravity problem.
Yeah, I always assumed that they're sort of like the Thranta, right, from Alderaan. They were these huge flying manta ray-like creatures that originally used as transport. If I recall correctly, they have like these gas-filled organs in their body that allow them to fly. I would assume maybe their skeletons are more bird-like and that they're strong because they have those support structures, but they're sack-filled with air to keep them light. Who knows what gravity on Kamino is like? Is it Earth size? Is it smaller? So there's a lot of things that we don't know because we're not entirely sure of like how Kamino worked. But for me, in my head, as I'm sitting there watching the Attack of the Clones and like not paying attention to some story bits, just thinking about this Iowa, I'm like, oh, okay, so maybe is it truly flying? Is it gliding on the currents above the ocean like the flying fish? Is it gas filled? Is it really, really light? So those are the kind of questions that I love and would love to maybe answer one day if I could have my wish and create a Star Wars documentary on the organisms of the galaxy.
Yes. And there's a new bestiary, at least, book coming out on Star Wars that I'll put a link to or whatever they just announced recently. I'm curious to see what new nuggets of information we get.
Pre-ordering now.
Yeah. And it also gives me hope about the like, okay, well, if Star Wars, is selling and interested in exploring these things, we got to make our full-length documentaries of you as a force-sensitive conservation biologist out there. Unfortunately, I mean, necropsies are the way to learn about these things a lot of the times, right? Like, got to find some specimens, give them an autopsy, figure out whether or not they're gas filled or not. So
I'm okay with that. Throw me on Kamino. I will do a dissection in the field. I'm good.
yeah. Although I guess if you're force sensitive, you could just like have conversations with some of these animals first too.
Oh, that's assuming I have that speak to animals ability, like Ezra does. I would be so lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's not a given, I guess.
Oh, now I imagine having like some underwater research base in the trench of Naboo and just getting to like watch and observe everything. Ugh, that would be my dream.
I'm now imagining it like Sea Lab 2021.
Ooh. I would watch that.
I would still watch that.
Naboo Sea Lab.
Yeah.
There's got to be at least like 4 Gungans in the background, just like
Yeah. So everything we've talked about so far, at least as far as we know, are sort of animals, right? Like non-sentient species. But there are also the sentient species on Mon Cala or whatever the planet is called. We saw in the first season, I think it was, of Mandalorian, the Mon Calamari planet, and also the Quarren. Is that how you pronounce them? The other species that lives there?
Yeah, I love that planet. I read a lot of legends, right? And so they went to Mon Cala many times, and they've really created an incredible ecosystem. Yes, there is the Mon Cala and the Quarren as the 2 main sentient species on there, but there were other sentient species in legends that lived on Mon Cala, or I called it Dak. They're like the singing mollusks, like a bunch of clams that were networked together telepathically, and they had a form of sentience. There were like these massive jellyfish beings that had a hive mind intelligence. And then there were the whalodons. They were literally just whales on the planet of Dak, but they were sentient and they had their own separate civilization away from the Quarren and the Mon Cala. And they were just so cool for me. I want to go to Mon Cala.
They had the bad guys in one of like the Glove of Darth Vader kids book series. They go hunting whalodons, and that the heroes got to put a stop to this. And
I would love to do that so bad. I would be on that ship. I would be opposing any bounty hunter trying to hunt down my whalodon friends.
Star Wars and Star Trek sort of got there first, and science is sort of catching up. But talking about whale sentience and stuff like that, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it's something I'm certainly following, the like AI sort of figuring out whale languages from these huge databases of noises, and scientists maybe having conversations with them. And I just can't help but think of, Voyage Home in Star Trek. But it's great to know that they also did it in Star Wars. Because, I feel like in a couple hundred years or whatever, humans are going to be like, can you believe the people in 2024 didn't know that like whales were trying to chat with us this whole time? What idiots.
I would be here for that. In the world of Star Wars, the whalodons, they spoke through song, right? That was their form of language. On our planet, whales communicate with each other through vocalization, through their songs. And it's really cool because there's culture in the world of whales, right? Mm-hmm. Like different groups of, I think, humpbacks have different songs based on where they're from. In the Antarctic, there are different cultures of killer whales or orca that have learned to hunt very different ways based on what part of Antarctica they're in, or even across the world. There are many different cultures of orca We have the shark hunting orca that are famous here in Southern California, right? Now there's all those stories of killer whales attacking boats because they've had it
Right.
with us. I think we have to step back a little bit. And when it comes to thinking about sentience, especially with whales and the idea of intelligence, right? Like they're smart creatures. They think, they feel, they get depression, right? As we know from whales in captivity.
Well, for the Mon Calamari and the corn, at least, they evolve on a planet that's all or mostly water. Does it make sense that they're humanoid shaped? Does it make sense that they breathe air?
I don't think
That might make sense.
so. I think like evolutionary wise, not everything is evolving towards a human form if because like nothing evolves towards a final shape. In the world of Star Wars, of course, so many sentient creatures are going to have a human shape because that
Right.
works for the creature designers and the people in costume. And that's totally fine. That's where you suspend all disbelief and be like, all right, all sentient creatures in the world of Star Wars are human shaped. Cool,
Right.
let's move on. Now, if we actually look at it from a science point of view, if we're assuming that there is some kind of like highly optimal shape for brain function and intelligence and manipulating the world around them, perhaps that humanoid-esque shape does make sense for a lot of things in the Star Wars galaxy. Maybe that's the living force's way of making sure that there's balance with the sentient
Yeah.
creatures, right? And I think it also makes sense that they evolved at the same time on their world, two separate species, perhaps related because they're both kind of squid-ish in a sense. On our planet, we've had multiple species coexisting at the same time, even with humans, right? Or our Homo ancestors, where you had Homo sapien coexisting with Homo neanderthalensis.
Now, you said something about different evolutionary tracks towards the same shape or whatever in terms of humanoid shape. I know I've seen the meme, but I don't actually know the science behind it, and maybe you do. Is everything on Earth turning into crabs? Is this a thing?
Yeah.
What?
Well,
I have not
yes,
seen
yes,
that.
yes. Okay. So there's this concept that you could learn about on this amazing show called PBS Eons, which I happen to be a host
Oh,
of. So there's a concept called carcinization. I'm saying that incorrectly, but basically it means things are looking like crabs, right? There are lots of like not closely related groups of arthropods, which are the crabs, lobsters, and things like that, and they evolve very similar shapes where they all look like crabs. Now, that's cool because that's a form of a concept called convergent evolution because they're all evolving and adapting to this very similar environment under the water where they can survive the pressure of the ocean and being able to have that type of exoskeleton that's efficient. And so that's why the concept of everything's evolving into crabs comes from. Now, like that's not to say
excellent.
like humans are going to become crab-like people because we're not
Okay.
evolving in that environment, but it really applies to those kinds of arthropods.
What about Zoidberg?
You have to make sure you put that into your Science of Futurama panel, James.
You mentioned the arthropod. Going on a deep dive into Jedi Survivor, the aquarium held by Scuba Steve, which you help find aquatic creatures for in the game, is the glossum crab. And that is like a hermit crab, but it's actually a mollusk. Do you think that could be possible?
Well, yeah, kind of. It just depends on what the environmental pressures are. So if you look on our world, mollusks are so varied in shape and form, right? You've got clams, you got oysters, and then related to them are octopus and squid, right? They're
Mhm.
all mollusks and they evolve very, very different forms. Slugs, snails, also mollusks. So that's where you can have something like a mollusk that may have evolved into some kind of crab-like form because it had the evolutionary pressures and the random mutations that lead to it, and it helps it survive in that environment. Sure, let's go with it. I'm okay with that. I mean, like if you look on our planet too, like if you look at barnacles, barnacles are a type of crustacean, but you wouldn't think it just looking at them. They start off as looking like little tiny shrimp-like creatures, and then eventually as they flow through the ocean and they land on like a surface, they land on their back. And then they form that barnacle-like shell around them, and then they become stationary organisms. They don't leave because they cement themselves to rock, or in some sad cases, sea turtles and like whales. And then their front appendages become like that thing you see come out of like that feathery, like weird appendages. That's like their front that they're using to get food out of the water. That's a crustacean, but it looks nothing like you would think. There's never the idea of impossible when it comes to evolution. And even when you go into speculative or fictional evolution, as long as it makes some sense, like I'm okay with it.
Am I meant to understand that there's someone named Scuba Steve and he's like
Yeah.
a scuba divey type thing?
Yeah, he's like a
Okay.
little tiny scuba diving guy, and he talks with a Scottish brogue. It's so amazing.
Yeah, Scuba Steve is cool. Like he has this hilarious accent and he just flies around on his little ship collecting marine creatures that you help him collect, and they put them all in this one aquarium for some reason in the bar in Kobo. And I definitely put off major story points because Scuba Steve was there for a second.
Oh yeah, he tells his whole life story one chapter at a time. So every time you run into him, he's like, "Oh, you want to hear more?" And he says, "Oh yes, I was harpooned, left for dead." And then he talks about how like these eels saved him, and yeah, you're helping him find all these little sea creatures and swamp creatures that all live basically in puddles. That kind of reminds me of like desert pupfish on Earth, because some of them you find on Jeddah, which is a desert planet, and you're just like, oh, here's a random oasis, and it has a random type of fish in it that we want to find.
Oh, cool.
And desert pupfish, for those who don't know, live in Death Valley, and they basically live in like these little tiny remnants of lakes and rivers, and they're an inch long at most. And some of them are highly adapted to hot water and very, very salty water.
Yeah, the desert pupfish are really, really cool examples of species adapting to changing environment, right? So it's like hypothesized from what I remember is that these pupfish are remnants from the ice age, and there was larger bodies of water. And as, the ice age ended and these areas of water disappeared and the climate changed, they were left in these smaller bodies of water. And so they just adapted as best as they could to all these different changes, right? From high salinity to low oxygen to high heat. And so the pupfish are really, really cool examples of that, and really niche survival, like surviving to like something very, very specific. And so when you're on Kobo or Jeddah, yeah, definitely these creatures are very similar. And again, I think that's where I love some of these creatures from Star Wars, especially for the aquatic realm, is there's the thought that goes into these that makes them feel familiar with a slight change to make them feel alien, right? That's one of my favorite things about Star Wars creatures and these aliens is there's always some remnant of familiarity there. And I think it takes real skill to make something be familiar but also alien. I have such respect for all of the creature designers.
Well, I remember when we had Jake Lunt Davis on this show, I think for our panel, this Comic-Con special edition, he mentioned that when he was designing fish for Acto, it was really, really tough to create fish that looked alien and not Earth-like, because there are so many alien-looking Earth-like fish that, some of the deep sea fish that just have weird things going on. And so it's like, how do I make ones that are more alien than that? He did a bunch. It turns out that a bunch of the things that we see on Acto, like they'll have the fish in the caretaker's village or something, and it turns out they reuse those props in Solo. So it's like same type of fish, but two different planets. Same thing with some of the fish that we see on Kobo in Jedi Survivor, at least share the same names as some of the fish from Naboo. The scalefish, was it the do re mi fa sol la ti?
Sorry, that's one of my favorite naming conventions that they ever did for that
Oh
one.
yeah.
Wait, that's not just a James pun?
No, that's what they're called.
They're literally the scalefish. There's the do, the re, the mi, the fa, the la.
Si la ti.
There's the Jeddah fan-tailed la, the big mouth fa, and such.
That's very
so yeah,
funny.
not me, but somebody else having fun.
The scalefish thing, I saw it in our notes and I was like, oh, James. No, just some other pun-loving person at Star Wars. I love it.
Well, one thing really quick I'd like to bring up, because you were talking about it, James, is I talk about this a lot when I talk about nature in Star Wars and like animals in Star Wars, is the concept of invasive non-native species is like rarely discussed in the world of Star Wars, but I think it makes sense that like a lot of these creatures, whether or not they are actually related, that's a whole other thing of like naming convention where there's like a general name and whoever named it said it looked like a scalefish, so I'm going to call them all scalefish, right? But we see it a lot, especially in Clone Wars, where there are these same organisms that show up on different planets. And that's, I think, a remnant of just galactic exploration, where people from other parts of the world, specifically like the core planets, are just going out exploring and bringing these other creatures with them. And then with what I assume is like a pet or exotic animal trade, right? As they go back and forth between the galactic core, these other organisms are spreading out And as they find environments that are similar, as we've seen in the Star Wars galaxy, they just adapt and are like, I live here now. In Tara Whitlatch's book, she talks about Wampa adapting to the North Pole of Coruscant and how, like, it's cold here. There's ice. We're good. We're just going to hunt some poor, unsuspecting folk who happen to be, like, heading up to check out the water factories or whatever on Coruscant. That's kind of one of my favorite things I talk about, to bring in the concepts of invasive species and non-native species and just human, or in this case, civilization, moving things and bringing things where they shouldn't be, but somehow they survive.
This is where Melissa chimes in about Chewbacca bringing porgs to Batu, and does he cause an ecological disaster?
Yeah, I mean, it's not marine biology specific, so don't think I haven't thought about it and wanted to ask Gabe about it. And if you have any thoughts, we did cover this in our recent environmental apocalypse conversation from April's episode. But yeah, you can't just do that, Chewie. Like, I get it, they're cute, you want to take them, but like, you know, you can't take a breeding pair, you can't take eggs, you can't do it.
I think there's a lot less regulation in the galaxy just because, they're dealing with multiple civil wars and things like that. I'm
Right.
sure the paperwork is just too difficult.
No, I think that legitimately came up in that conversation was like, when you're dealing with war, certain other things get overlooked. So
Even with like Scuba Steve, right? When you collect all of these fish from the different planets you go to, not just on Kobo, but you also collect them from like Jeddah, and you're bringing them all back to Kobo. So who knows? Can they escape? That's a big problem we see in our world with the aquatic realm, right? With the fish trade and a lot of exotic species being accidentally or intentionally released because people can't take care of them and really messing up local environments. I cannot remember the name of those fish, but the ones that you see jumping out of the water.
The Asian carp?
Yeah, those were released in North American waters, and they have no predators. They're super aggressive. They kill off other local species, and they're dangerous to us too. And there's no real way to deal with them except trying to go out and catch them and not get hit by a fish.
Hey, it gives them a fighting chance. So many times, we can catch fish and have no risk to ourselves. And
boredom. Sorry. Stupid hobby. We should probably start wrapping up, but are there other ocean critters you definitely want to hit?
On Pagadon, in the very first episode of Mando, they have that walrus-like creature, which is the Ravenak. I actually did not know that's what his name was. Okay, I will just put this really quick. I was so excited when I saw that because as a marine mammal person, I feel like the walruses, one, are very underappreciated. And the fact that this creature designer, whoever you are, thank you for bringing a walrus into the Star Wars galaxy. I have a very special place for walruses in my heart because I got to help describe the fossil genus of walrus from California.
Wow.
Titanataria orangensis. And I loved it because we only have one species of walrus left in our world, right? Odobenus rosmaris, that lives in the Arctic. They're very large, lumbering creatures with their two front tusks. They eat mostly mollusks. 15-ish million years ago, we had lots of other different kinds of walruses living, especially in the Pacific and in California. And they were more active predators. They were more like sea lion-ish. And so seeing this predatory-ish walrus-like reptilian creature show up for me was very exciting. For me, that was just this really cool moment where my worlds collided and I got to see a walrus in Star Wars. And that's probably one of my favorite new creatures introduced in the world, even though it only had like 3 seconds of screen time.
Right. Do you think that it actually ate that driver? Like, was it actually predating on him? Or was it like it doesn't like the noise or the vibrations and was just territorial? Or what do you think?
I think it ate him.
Okay.
That was really aggressive. I think it was a mix of like, you're in my space and I'm hungry, so too bad.
Right.
yeah,
Fair
a little
enough.
of column A, a little of column B.
I just think of, hippos or moose that are like very dangerous because they're territorial and they'll mess you up, but they won't then feast on you. So I just wasn't sure with the walrus.
I want to believe that the walrus was predatory because
Yeah.
again, that's like the special place of this predatory walrus.
Well, and like a human in a vehicle is kind of like a mollusk, right? You just got to like crack the shell, nice gooey inside. Too dark?
No, I'm here. I'm here for it. I love it.
Wow, I'm never going to think about people in cars ever the same way.
Yeah, you're like a little delicious clam. If you're on the half shell, if you have a convertible, I guess, like the like that driver. Well, usually we ask everyone about their favorite Star Wars character.
Okay, my favorite Star Wars character as of right now is Ahsoka. I feel like Ahsoka embodies so much of what I love of the Star Wars world and what I want to embody as a mentor and just like a person. I've had my own traumas in the past and trying to overcome them. Seeing someone like Ahsoka be this amazing hero. I love everything about her. I loved Ahsoka.
Well, if someone is interested in getting into your field, whether that's being an awesome host of a PBS show, whether that's a paleontologist, whether that's working at a museum, what is your go-to sort of recommendation for people who watch Star Wars, get inspired, and want to go be a scientist?
Yeah, I think the first thing is kind of like what I said is don't be afraid to ask questions and think about things. When you're watching science fiction, Star Wars, all of that, ask questions of like, could that work? Is that plausible in our world? Where do they get inspired from that? Because learning to ask the right kind of questions and finding the answers the right way is a very big part of being a scientist. So that's a great start. Now, after that, you can really start to go into depth and learn how to find information online, connect dots and figure out where the answers lie is really important. Of course, school, getting your degrees and all that stuff. But I always try to tell my students and like my interns is like, never lose that curiosity. Never forget about pondering why and thinking about the greater mysteries in the world. That's where all the science comes from, is thinking about all the possibilities, thinking about the magic of the universe, right? And finding the answers to it. If you never lose that sense of wonder of the world and appreciation, I find that a really important part of being not only a good scientist and educator, but a great scientist, because that leads you to what you want to do and the reasoning behind it.
Well, you mentioned your PBS Eons.
Yeah.
Where can people find that, and where can people find you? Do you have any publications or social media that you want to hype?
Yeah, so for PBS Eons, you can find us on YouTube and TikTok at Eon Show. Make sure you like and subscribe. We have lots of great episodes and TikToks and things like that to learn about stories from deep time, paleontology, and space and the wonders of the universe. You can find me on Instagram, either on at Cosplay for Science or at Paleo Paradox. I usually post about the work that I'm doing, and we do have some publications coming up.
Tell us about Cosplay for Science.
Cosplay for Science is this really cool science education initiative that I founded with 3 of my very good friends and colleagues who all happen to be paleontologists. And what we do is we like to talk about the science that's inherent and woven into our favorite fandoms, from Star Wars to Pokemon. We're doing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons science right now. We go to Comic-Cons and other community events, and we dress up in cosplay and we act as characters and work on sharing those science, helping people make those connections. We've grown scientists and science educators and science writers and like you two and all these different folks who are interested in helping audiences connect and think about the science in their everyday lives and interests. It's all about getting people to think about and appreciate the science in their everyday lives and interests.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's anything you want to pitch for San Diego Comic-Con too, since I know that's coming up. I know we can't talk about our dates and times for our panel, but if you want to tell us about your panel and like some of the other events.
Yeah, sure. So if you're going to San Diego Comic-Con, definitely on Friday, the 26th, come to Balboa Park from 12 to 4. We are going to be part of a really cool Dungeons and Dragons themed Steam Fair and BioBlitz. When you come, you get to take on a quest to learn about nature, learn about all of the amazing native plants and species that are found in San Diego, and learn about the world of science and natural history through the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Cosplay is very much encouraged, so come in your favorite D&D character cosplay that you got.
If you want to tell us quickly about your panel.
Our panel is going to be about Camp Cretaceous and also a little bit about Chaos Theory, the new show that came out. And we're going to talk a lot about why people love dinosaurs. Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, all the different dinosaur types of franchises and pop culture science fiction. What is it about dinosaurs that keeps us coming back to them? So we've got some great paleontologists and other scientists on our panel who are going to talk about not just the science in Jurassic World, Chaos Theory, but a little bit about why we all love these terrible lizards.
Awesome. Well, Gabe, I really want to thank you for coming and talking with us and for being our go-to, science enthusiast, paleontology person, Hergil expert, multi-hyphenate, and I mean the first person to actually get me to dress up in cosplay at LA Comic-Con last year. So, like it's just you're an all-around inspiration and joy to have on the show.
It was absolutely my pleasure. I love hanging out with you both. So thank you so much for letting me be on Star Warsology. And I'm totally making a shirt that says Purgle Expert now.
Put that right on your business card.
We'll recommend that skill in LinkedIn for you.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much, Gabe. Speaking of Comic-Con stuff, I also have a panel at Comic-Con. It is the science of Futurama. So we are going to dive into such things as time travel and interplanetary and space travel, archaeology of like old New York under new New York, Nibbler and Seymour, and of course, what about Zoidberg? So anyway, shut up and take my money.
Okay, and my San Diego Comic-Con panel is about science advisors in science fiction. So I've got people who work for the MCU, people work for Disney Animation, the science advisor for Star Trek, all to talk about, the random questions they get asked and the things they have to try to justify scientifically. I did a similar panel, you may remember, at LA Comic-Con. That's one of our past episodes, but I'm really looking forward to bringing this panel to San Diego Comic-Con as well. Well, that wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our guest, Gabriel Santos, and we want to thank all of you for listening.
Are you looking for links that we might have talked about? Check out our show notes page available at skywalkingthroughneverland.com/star-warsologies. Also, check out our YouTube channel where we have the episodes available for listening, and we have some of the episodes available with cool visuals.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies, or you know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or at starwarsologies@gmail.com. We're always looking for more ideas, so we would love to hear from you. We also have a fan group on Facebook. It's very cleverly named the Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group. So join us there today and watch for our posts about new episodes and other random questions that come up. Please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service, and share it with your friends.
No topic is off limits, even whether the Sith rule of 2 was really more just a guideline than a hard and fast rule. We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney's, and Marvel, including the Neverland Clubhouse, the Max Effects podcast, and the flagship show, Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also a YouTube show, Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of these shows, plus ours, at skywalkingnetwork.com.
All right, see you next time on Star Warsologies, when we'll get all brainy about neuroscience.
Did you know that some whales collaborated with Digital Underground? They did the humpback dance. Is your chance to do the humpback do-do-do.